The crystal chandelier shimmered above the ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, scattering light like diamonds across polished marble floors. Music from a live quartet floated through the air, but Emily Denoir hardly noticed. She tugged at the neckline of her borrowed black dress, acutely aware that the fabric hugged her in ways she wasn't used to. The hem brushed just above her knees, far too elegant for someone more at home in hospital scrubs and sneakers. Her best friend Luna Martinez leaned close, whispering into her ear with a mixture of affection and impatience. "Stop fidgeting. You look beautiful. These people need to see real heroes tonight, not just donors with fat wallets." Emily attempted a smile, but felt the weight of eyes around her. The ballroom was filled with men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in shimmering gowns, their laughter rising above the music, punctuated by the clink of champagne flutes. She longed for the familiar hum of hospital monitors, the steady rhythm of saving lives, not this world of glitter and excess. "I should be home studying," she muttered, though even to her own ears the excuse sounded thin. Luna rolled her eyes, pressing a glass of champagne into Emily's hand. "You've worked 12-hour shifts for weeks. Take one night to let people celebrate what you do." Across the ballroom, Sebastian Cross stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights stretching endlessly behind him. His gray eyes moved over the crowd with detached precision, a man both present and absent at the same time. At 32, he had built Cross Ventures into a name whispered with admiration and envy. Yet tonight, surrounded by power and privilege, he felt trapped. "You look like you're plotting an escape," Jasper Reeves murmured as he joined him, handing him a glass of whiskey. Sebastian's mouth curved slightly. "Maybe I am. My father will notice if I disappear before the speeches, but I've already written the check. Isn't that enough?" Jasper studied him, his easy charm tempered with concern. "Not when the Singapore deal depends on appearances. You can't just hide in the shadows." Sebastian took a slow sip of whiskey, but his attention shifted when the lights dimmed and the evening's program began. The hospital staff were called to the stage, their names read with glowing praise. Polite applause filled the room, but when Emily stepped into the spotlight, Sebastian's breath caught unexpectedly. Her posture was shy, her smile hesitant, yet her dark eyes glowed with intelligence and quiet strength. She looked as though she would rather be anywhere else than standing under the chandelier, but the sincerity in her expression silenced something restless inside him. Jasper followed his gaze, smirking knowingly. "That's Dr. Emily Denoir, one of the brightest young emergency physicians in the city." Sebastian hardly heard him. For years, he had been surrounded by people who spoke in calculations and strategies. This woman seemed untouched by pretense. When the applause ended and the crowd scattered to dance and drink, Emily found refuge at the bar, her shoulders tight with exhaustion. She ordered a glass of white wine, grateful for a quiet corner. She was studying the bubbles in her glass when a voice spoke beside her, low and measured. "You looked far away during the speeches." Emily turned and found herself face to face with the man from the window. Up close, he seemed larger than life, broad shoulders filling his tuxedo, gray eyes sharp, but softened by curiosity. "I was thinking about my patients," she said simply. "Those stories reminded me of the nights when I couldn't save everyone. That's the reality behind the applause." He extended his hand. "Sebastian Cross." "Just Emily," she replied, shot. King his hand, noting the roughness of his palm, strangely at odds with his polished image. He tilted his glass, studying her with interest. "You don't look like someone who enjoys this scene." "Neither do you," she answered with a small, reluctant smile. For the first time all evening, Sebastian felt himself drawn into a conversation not about business or legacy, but about what truly mattered. She spoke of sleepless nights in the ER, the fragile line between life and loss. He listened, drawn to her passion, her honesty. In return, he shared more than he intended about his company, about wanting to create something meaningful rather than another soulless empire. Their words blended with the music and laughter around them, but in that quiet alcove by the bar, it felt as though the ballroom had shrunk to just two people, an overworked doctor and a weary millionaire, each recognizing something rare and unexpected in the other. Neither of them noticed Luna watching from across the room with a knowing smile, nor Jasper shaking his head in disbelief. For Emily and Sebastian, the night had shifted, tilting their worlds toward a connection neither had planned. A spark born beneath the glitter of a chandelier, destined to change everything. Emily had told herself 100 reasons why she should cancel the dinner, but when Tuesday evening came, she still found herself standing outside a quiet little Italian restaurant tucked between two tall brick buildings. The glow from its windows spilled onto the sidewalk in warm amber light, so different from the glittering chandeliers of the gala. She smoothed the sleeve of her coat and reminded herself she could leave at any time. She was not here for romance. She was here because she was curious about the man who had made her laugh when she least expected it. Inside, Sebastian sat at a corner table already waiting with two menus folded neatly in front of him. When he saw her walk in, his expression softened, and for a moment the practiced detachment of the businessman disappeared. He rose quickly and pulled out her chair with an ease that surprised her. "You made it," he said, almost like he had doubted she would. Emily glanced around the restaurant. There were no photographers, no curious eyes, just a handful of couples sharing pasta and laughter. "You promised casual," she said quietly as she sat down. "So far, I believe you." They ordered simple dishes, ravioli for her and penne with marinara for him. The waiter poured wine and left them alone in the soft candlelight. For a few moments they were silent, and then Emily asked the question that had been on her mind since the gala. "Why me? You could spend your time with anyone in that ballroom. Why single me out?" Sebastian leaned back, his gray eyes steady. "Because you were the only person there who wasn't pretending. You looked like you'd rather vanish than be applauded. You listened to those stories like they mattered, and you weren't impressed by me." Emily's lips curved despite herself. "You're assuming I'm impressed now?" "Am I wrong?" he asked, leaning closer. Her laugh came out soft and unexpected. She shook her head. "I'm impressed by people who keep their promises to patients. I'm impressed by the nurse who stays an extra hour to comfort a family. Money doesn't move me the way you think it does." Sebastian studied her, the candlelight catching the sharp angles of his face. "That's exactly why I wanted to see you again." Their food arrived, and for a while they ate in comfortable silence. But beneath the surface, Emily felt something stir that unsettled her. There was danger in how easily he made her forget the chaos of the hospital, how quickly his presence quieted the constant weight on her shoulders. She had built walls around her heart long ago, and already they felt fragile. Across the table, Sebastian felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. For years, he had measured nights by contracts signed or deals closed. Tonight, he found himself measuring it by the sound of Emily's laughter. Yet in the back of his mind, his father's voice echoed like a warning. This dinner was a distraction, and distractions were dangerous. When the plates were cleared and the wine glasses emptied, Sebastian walked her out into the cool night air. The city hummed around them, but for a moment it felt like they were the only two people on the street. Emily pulled her coat tighter. "Thank you for dinner. It was different." "Different is good," he said gently. Then, almost without planning, he added, "I'd like to see you again." Emily hesitated, her practical nature rising like a shield. "My schedule is impossible. My world isn't like yours." Sebastian stepped closer, his voice steady. "Then I'll learn your world." Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. She nodded once, surprising herself. As she walked away, she could feel his gaze following her, and though she told herself not to read into it, deep down she knew a door had been opened that neither of them could easily close. Behind them, a black car idled at the curb. Inside, Theodore Cross's driver snapped a photo of the pair under the streetlight before pulling into traffic. The first shadow of interference had already begun, and neither Emily nor Sebastian had any idea how quickly their fragile connection would be tested. Rain streaked across the city windows as Emily pushed through another endless shift in the emergency room. Her hair was tied back, her hands moving with precise urgency, but her thoughts kept straying to the man who had walked her home 2 nights ago. She hated the distraction, yet couldn't ignore the strange pull Sebastian Cross had created in her life. Patience always came first. but in the quiet moments between emergencies, she replayed the way his eyes had softened when he told her he wanted to learn her world. Sebastian, meanwhile, sat in his penthouse office staring at a stack of reports he could barely focus on. Numbers blurred, graphs made no sense, and for the first time since he had built his empire, he realized he was prioritizing something other than profit margins. Every time his phone lit up with a message from Emily, the weight of his father's expectations seemed a little lighter. Jasper noticed it immediately. "You're smiling at nothing again," Jasper teased from across the room. "That doctor has your head spinning." Before Sebastian could reply, the shrill ring of his private line interrupted them. His father's voice filled the room with sharp edges. "You've been careless. Photos are already circulating of you with some unknown woman. Do you understand how this could damage the Singapore deal?" Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Her name is Emily, and she's not part of your negotiations. Leave her out of this." Theodore's cold laugh echoed through the receiver. "Everything is part of business. You're either focused on expansion or you're finished." The call ended, leaving Sebastian staring at the city lights with a storm brewing inside him. That same storm seemed to follow him later that night when he appeared at the hospital just as Emily was finishing her shift. She was exhausted, her scrubs damp from hours of work, but her eyes lit briefly at the sight of him. "You should be in some boardroom, not standing in a hospital hallway," she said. He handed her a paper cup. "Coffee for the hardest working woman in the city. Walk with me." They found themselves on the hospital roof, rain misting across the skyline. Emily sipped her coffee, searching his face. "You're different tonight. What happened?" He hesitated, then told her about the phone call, about the pressure building against him. She listened quietly, her brows knitting in concern. "You can't let someone else dictate your happiness," she said softly. "Not even your father." Her words struck deeper than she knew. He moved closer, the rain catching in his hair, his voice low. "Every room I walk into, people want something from me. Now tonight I just wanted to stand beside someone who sees me, not my name." Emily felt the walls around her tremble. She had promised herself never to get pulled into the orbit of wealth and power, yet here she was, shivering not from the rain, but from the closeness of him. The tension between them broke with startling inevitability. One moment they were speaking, the next his lips brushed hers, and the city seemed to vanish. It was not the polished charm of a billionaire, but a raw and hungry need for something real. Emily responded before she could think, clutching his jacket as if the ground itself had shifted beneath her. When they finally pulled apart, she whispered, "This is a mistake." He shook his head, eyes burning with conviction. "No, this is the only thing that feels right." Neither noticed the distant flash of a camera lens from across the street, a shadow hired by Theodore Cross to capture proof of his son's distraction. That photo would soon ignite a chain of events more dangerous than either of them could imagine. For now, though, Emily and Sebastian stood in the rain, two worlds colliding under a stormy sky, unaware that their one wild night was only the beginning of something that could change their lives forever. The hospital bathroom was cold and too bright, the hum of the fluorescent light drilling into Emily's skull as she stared down at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. One pink line had been expected. Two lines were impossible. Her breath came shallow, her reflection in the mirror pale and frightened. She had delivered bad news to families for years, but nothing compared to the shock now crashing over her. She pressed her hand against her stomach, whispering, "This can't be happening." The knock at the door jolted her. Luna's voice filtered through, sharp with concern. "Emily, you've been in there too long. Are you okay?" Emily shoved the test deep into her pocket, splashed water on her face, and forced herself to open the door. Luna took one look and hauled her into an empty exam room. "What is it? What happened?" The truth spilled out silently when Emily pulled the test from her pocket. Luna's gasp filled the room. "Sebastian?" Emily nodded, her throat closing. "He doesn't know. I don't even know how to tell him." That night, Sebastian sat in his penthouse office, staring at the same page of a report for nearly an hour. His phone lay silent beside him. Emily's messages had been short, distracted, distant. Something was wrong, and the silence gnawed at him. Jasper, perched on the edge of the desk, finally spoke. She's slipping away from you. If you want answers, stop hiding behind texts. Show up. The next evening, Sebastian walked into the hospital break room with 2 lavender lattes. Emily was hunched over paperwork, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. She looked up, startled. "What are you doing here?" His voice was quiet but insistent. "Bringing you coffee, and asking what's wrong. You've been avoiding me." He sat down across from her, the gray of his eyes steady, unyielding. Emily's resolve cracked. Her fingers tightened around the pen, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I need to tell you something, and it may change everything." He leaned forward, his hand covering hers. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together." Her eyes filled, and the words tumbled out. "I'm pregnant." The break room fell silent except for the steady hum of the vending machine. Sebastian's face went still as the meaning sank in. He looked at her as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "Pregnant," he repeated, testing the word. "Are you certain?" Emily nodded, pulling her hand away as if bracing for impact. "I didn't plan to tell you this way. I know you have no room in your life for something like this. I can handle it on my own." His reaction stunned her. His voice rose, rough with disbelief. "Handle it alone? This is our child, Emily. You think I would walk away?" She tried to steady herself, shaking her head. "Your father, your business, your empire. This isn't the life you planned. I don't want to ruin everything you've built." His expression hardened, not with anger at her, but at the assumption she carried. "Is that what you think of me? That I'm so shallow I would see this as a burden? That I'd turn my back on you?" Before she could answer, her pager shrieked with an emergency code. She rose, her voice breaking. "We'll talk later. I have to go." She fled down the hallway, leaving Sebastian at the table with the untouched lattes and the weight of a revelation that had shattered his carefully ordered world. When Emily vanished into the chaos of the ER, Sebastian remained frozen, his thoughts colliding in a storm of fear, wonder, and determination. He had not planned for this, but one truth cut through the noise with startling clarity. He would not let her face it alone. What neither of them knew was that Theodore Cross had already received the photographs of them together, and his next move would strike at the very heart of their fragile, growing bond. Sebastian sat in his office long after midnight, the city glittering beneath him, but his mind trapped in the hospital break room where Emily had whispered the words that turned his world upside down. Pregnant. The word pulsed through his veins like a challenge, like a responsibility he had never imagined but could not ignore. He had always believed his legacy would be measured in contracts and towers of glass, yet suddenly the only legacy that mattered was forming in the life of a woman who didn't trust he would stay. The heavy mahogany door opened without a knock. Theodore Cross strode in, his presence filling the room with the same force that had bent boardrooms to his will for decades. He dropped a folder on the desk. Inside were photographs of Sebastian and Emily leaving the restaurant, standing in the rain on the hospital rooftop, her face lit by a smile meant only for him. "This is what you've reduced yourself to," Theodore said coldly. "Sneaking around with some doctor who sees you as a ladder. You've jeopardized everything we've built." Sebastian's jaw tightened as he closed the folder. "Her name is Emily, and she doesn't need me. She was prepared to raise this child alone rather than ask for anything. That's not a ladder. That's integrity." Theodore's voice sharpened like broken glass. "A child? You cannot be serious." Sebastian met his father's stare, refusing to flinch. "She's pregnant, and I'm going to stand by her." Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then Theodore leaned back, his expression filled with disdain. "Then write her a check. Set up a trust. Keep her comfortable while you get back to the work that matters. Cross Ventures does not bend to personal distractions." Sebastian stood, every muscle in his body rigid. "Then maybe it bends to me. If you can't understand that this child and this woman are not distractions, then we have nothing left to discuss." For a moment, Theodore's composure cracked, his face reddening as he hissed, "You would throw away an empire for her?" Sebastian's voice was steady, the words leaving no room for doubt. "I would throw away everything that doesn't matter. And right now, that's this empire." The confrontation left the air in the room charged like lightning before a storm. Jasper, who had been listening just outside, stepped in once Theodore stormed out. "You realize what you've just done? The board will hear of this by morning." Sebastian sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Then let them hear it. I'm done letting my father dictate the shape of my life. Emily needs to know I'm not walking away. Not now. Not ever." Across the city, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ultrasound appointment card she had scheduled alone. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the promise in his eyes, but fear pressed down heavier than any night in the ER. She whispered to herself, "If I let him in and he leaves, I don't know if I'll survive it." Neither of them realized that the game had already shifted. Theodore was not finished. The photographs he held would soon find their way to tabloids and investors, a spark meant to ignite scandal. And in the quiet hours of the night, as Emily drifted into uneasy sleep and Sebastian braced himself for war, a storm was already gathering that would test not just their love, but the very future of the family they had barely begun to imagine. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender polish, the kind of place designed to soothe but incapable of silencing the storm in Emily's chest. She sat clutching her appointment card so tightly it bent between her fingers. Sebastian had insisted on coming even when she told him he didn't need to. Now he sat beside her, restless energy radiating from his body, his knee bouncing, his eyes scanning the room like it was another board meeting he had to control. When Dr. Walsh finally called her name, Emily rose on unsteady legs. Sebastian was immediately at her side, his hand warm against hers. In the exam room, the hum of the machine filled the silence as the doctor moved the wand across Emily's abdomen. Emily held her breath, terrified of what she might or might not hear. Then the steady rhythm of heartbeats broke the air. Not one heartbeat, two. "Congratulations," Dr. Walsh said with a small smile. "You're carrying twins." The room tilted. Emily's hand flew to her stomach, her mind racing through every impossible scenario. 2 cribs, 2 mouths to feed, twice the risk. Sebastian gripped her hand tighter, staring at the screen where 2 small, flickering forms pulsed with life. His voice was hoarse when he whispered, "2 babies." Emily looked at him, expecting fear, resistance, anything that would confirm the doubts gnawing at her. Instead, she saw wonder, the hard edges of his face softened by awe. For the first time, she believed he might truly mean what he had promised. But as they left the office, clutching ultrasound photos, reality pressed back in. Outside, a black car waited. Theodore Cross stepped out, his expression unreadable. He looked at the images in Sebastian's hand before speaking. "Twins. The scandal doubles. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation? Investors are already nervous. Singapore is slipping away." Sebastian's jaw clenched. "Singapore can wait. My children cannot." Theodore's eyes flashed with cold fury. "You would throw away generations of work for a woman you barely know?" Emily's heart pounded as she stood between them. She wanted to defend herself, but Sebastian spoke first, his voice ringing with certainty. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm building something new. If you can't understand that, then step aside." Theodore's lips curled into something sharp and dangerous. "If you won't bend to me, the board will. They don't care about your sentimental distractions." He slid back into the car and disappeared into the stream of traffic, leaving behind a silence heavier than any argument. Emily turned to Sebastian, her hands trembling. "He's going to destroy you." Sebastian shook his head, eyes fierce. "He can try, but he will not destroy us." That night, the tabloids exploded with photographs. Headlines screamed about the billionaire heir caught in scandal with a young doctor. Investors called emergency meetings. The empire Sebastian had built trembled beneath him. Yet while the world speculated, Sebastian sat in his penthouse, staring at the ultrasound photos taped to his desk. He whispered into the quiet, 2 lives, 2 reasons to fight. Across the city, Emily lay awake in her apartment, fear gnawing at her. She had always believed in control, in preparation, in steady hands, saving lives in the ER. Now she faced a battle she couldn't out-treat or diagnose. She touched her stomach and whispered to the twins growing inside her, "Your father says he will fight. I pray he is strong enough because everything is about to break." Neither knew that Theodore's next move was already in motion, a plan designed to force Sebastian to make an impossible choice between empire and family, and to prove once and for all whether love was stronger than ambition. The morning began like any other shift, but Emily's body betrayed her long before she realized the danger. She had been ignoring the pounding headaches, the swelling in her ankles, the dizziness when she stood too fast. She told herself it was just exhaustion, that she could push through the way she always had. But halfway down the hospital corridor, her vision blurred, her knees buckled, and the world tilted. The last thing she heard was Luna shouting her name before everything went dark. The alarms that followed jolted the ward into chaos. Nurses rushed, monitors beeped, voices sharpened with urgency. Within minutes, Emily was in the maternity intensive care unit, doctors surrounding her, blood pressure spiking to terrifying levels. The word preeclampsia cut through the air like a blade. Luna's hands shook as she dialed Sebastian's number. Her voice cracked when he answered. "You need to get here now. It's Emily. It's bad." Sebastian didn't remember the drive. He only remembered bursting into the hospital, rain still dripping from his coat, and finding Luna waiting outside a closed door. Her face was pale, her scrubs streaked with worry. "She collapsed," Luna said, her voice breaking. "They've stabilized her, but the twins are at risk. The next 48 hours are critical." The words slammed into him harder than any boardroom defeat. He pushed past fear and entered the room where Emily lay pale against white sheets, tubes, and monitors tethered to her body. Her sister Grace sat beside her, gripping her hand tightly. When she saw Sebastian, her eyes narrowed with protective suspicion. "She's scared," Grace said quietly. "Not just of this, but of whether you'll stay." Sebastian took the chair on Emily's other side, his hand covering hers, his voice low but fierce. "I'm not leaving. Not now. Not ever." Hours blurred as he remained by her side. When she stirred awake, her eyes heavy with sedation, he was already leaning close. She whispered hoarsely, "You shouldn't put your life on hold for me." His chest tightened. "My father already gave me an ultimatum this morning. Leave you and the babies or lose the company. Do you know what I told him? I told him to take it, because nothing matters more than you." Emily's eyes filled, tears sliding down her temples. She wanted to argue, to warn him of what he was giving up, but his convictions silenced her. For the first time since the test had shown 2 pink lines, she felt the ground steady beneath her. Jasper arrived soon after with news that shook them both. "The board sided with you," he said, his grin both relieved and incredulous. "The investors respect you more now because you chose family over expansion. They postponed Singapore for 6 months. Your father is furious, but you're still CEO." Sebastian exhaled, a rush of relief flooding through him, but his gaze never left Emily. He bent close, pressing his forehead to hers. "You hear that? Even the Empire can wait. You and our children can't." Emily closed her eyes, the steady beeping of the monitors surrounding them like a fragile promise of time. For now, the crisis had been held back, but the danger was far from over. The doctors warned that she would remain in the hospital until delivery. Every day would be a test of patience, fear, and endurance. As night fell, Sebastian sat in the chair beside her bed, his hand resting protectively over her stomach where 2 tiny lives fought to stay safe. Outside the hospital, Theodore Cross moved his next pieces into place, determined to prove that love could never outweigh legacy. What he didn't understand was that Sebastian had already chosen, and the choice had made him more dangerous than any businessman Theodore had ever faced. Thunder rattled the windows of the maternity ward as night swallowed the city. The storm had been building all afternoon, but no one expected the blackout that struck just as Emily clutched her belly, a sharp pain tearing through her body. The lights flickered once, then died, plunging the ward into darkness before the backup generators hummed to life. Nurses hurried with flashlights, their shadows jumping across the walls. The monitors beside Emily beeped wildly, her contractions suddenly fierce and unrelenting. Sebastian was already at her side, his suit jacket discarded, his hand gripping hers. His face was pale but steady, his voice low and urgent. "I'm here. You're not alone." Emily's eyes glistened with fear as she gasped. "It's too soon. They're not ready." Dr. Walsh swept into the room, her voice carrying authority over the chaos. "The storm knocked out one of our systems. We can't wait. Emily, the babies are in distress. We need to move now for an emergency section." The words sliced through Sebastian. He felt every beat of his heart slam against his ribs, but he forced himself to stay calm for her. As orderlies wheeled the bed toward the operating room, he kept pace, refusing to let go of her trembling hand. The air inside the surgical suite was thick with urgency. The emergency generators powered only essential machines, and the hum of their motors mixed with the storm outside. Emily was shaking, her lips pale, but her eyes found Sebastian through the mask and gown. "I'm terrified," she whispered. Sebastian bent close, his forehead nearly touching hers. "Then let me be terrified for you. You just hold on. I'll hold the rest." When the incision was made and the first cry filled the room, it was sharp, defiant, impossibly strong. "James Theodore Cross," Dr. Walsh announced, lifting a tiny boy with dark hair and a furious voice. 2 minutes later, another cry broke through, softer but steady. "And William Sebastian Cross," she added, placing the smaller twin gently into waiting hands. Sebastian's breath caught. 2 sons, so impossibly small yet alive. He looked at Emily, tears blurring his vision. She was too weak to speak, but when the nurses brought the babies close, she reached out with trembling fingers to touch their fragile hands. "They're perfect," she whispered, exhaustion pulling at her. For the next hours, the twins were rushed into the neonatal intensive care unit. Sebastian followed, refusing to leave even when doctors warned him they needed space. He pressed his hand against the incubator glass, watching the rise and fall of tiny chests, each breath a miracle. In that moment, the weight of every deal he had ever closed, every demand his father had ever made, seemed meaningless. Behind the glass, Emily slept under careful monitoring, her body drained but alive. The storm raged on outside, rain lashing against the windows, lightning splitting the sky. But inside the NICU, Sebastian felt a calm he had never known. He whispered to his sons, "You're stronger than the world knows, and I'll spend every day proving I deserve you." Yet in the shadows beyond the ward, Theodore Cross waited for his chance. The empire had not fallen, but the cracks were widening. He had underestimated his son's resolve, and now he prepared a strike that would test not just Sebastian's loyalty but Emily's endurance as a mother fighting for her fragile newborns. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one still coming. The days after the storm blurred into a fragile rhythm of beeping monitors and whispered prayers. Emily was confined to her hospital bed, her body slowly recovering, while the twins remained in the neonatal intensive care unit. Every morning, Sebastian walked the sterile hallway with 2 cups of coffee, one for Emily and one for himself, determined never to miss a moment. He pressed his hand against the incubator glass, whispering promises to the boys who were still fighting for every ounce of strength. Emily watched him with eyes full of disbelief. The man she thought would run had instead transformed into a constant presence. He read parenting books aloud at her bedside, learned how to fold impossibly tiny blankets, and even convinced the nurses to teach him how to change premature diapers. Yet beneath the tenderness, a shadow lingered. She saw the way his phone buzzed with unanswered calls, the way Jasper appeared with files Sebastian barely glanced at. She knew the empire he had built was crumbling under the weight of scandal. Late one evening, Theodore Cross arrived at the hospital, his expensive shoes echoing against the polished floor. He carried a bouquet of white lilies, the gesture as stiff and calculated as the expression on his face. Emily sat up straighter when he entered her room, her protective instincts sharpening. He placed the flowers on the table and looked at her with eyes that held no warmth. "You are stronger than I expected," he said flatly. "You refuse to be intimidated. But strength does not shield you from consequence. You've put my son in an impossible position." Before Emily could respond, Sebastian entered behind him, his face hard. Enough. You don't get to come here and speak to her that way. Theodore turned, his voice like steel. Do you even understand what you're sacrificing? The board is restless, investors are circling. If you keep choosing her, you will lose everything. Sebastian's answer was quiet but unshakable. Then let me lose everything. Because what I gain is worth more than anything you can count in numbers. The confrontation left Theodore simmering with silent rage. But Emily, though shaken, found her voice. If you want a place in your grandson's lives, it will not be through control or money. It will be by showing them respect. That is the only legacy they will inherit from you. For the first time, the older man faltered, caught off guard by the quiet power in her words. He left without another comment, his footsteps echoing down the hall. That night, after the twins had been weighed and monitored, Sebastian found Emily gazing at the city lights from her hospital bed. He sat beside her, the exhaustion in his eyes softened by something steadier. Jasper told me the Singapore investors called again, he said. They want to meet me tomorrow, but I'm not going. Emily turned sharply. Sebastian, you can't throw away your company for me. He shook his head, reaching for her hand. Not for you, for us, for James and William, for the life I want more than all the empires my father ever dreamed of. Tears burned her eyes as she whispered, I never believed you would stay, and you've done nothing but prove me wrong. As the monitors hummed and the city thundered with distant storm clouds, Sebastian bent to kiss her forehead. I'll keep proving it, every day, until there's no doubt left. Neither of them saw the message Theodore sent that night to a reporter, one last attempt to scorch the fragile ground they stood on. But for now, inside that hospital room, love felt stronger than fear, and Emily allowed herself to believe that perhaps even a man born into empire could choose family above all else. The church bells tolled softly across the city as sunlight poured through stained glass, casting patterns of gold and crimson on the polished floor. Emily stood before the mirror in a simple but elegant gown, her veil pinned carefully by Grace, her sister's hands trembling with both pride and nerves. Luna appeared in the doorway, her eyes already glistening. Sebastian is pacing like a teenager, she whispered. Emily smiled faintly, her own heart racing. She had faced life and death in the ER, but nothing compared to the weight of walking down that aisle toward a future that had once seemed impossible. Outside the bridal room, the small courtyard buzzed with quiet anticipation. Guests whispered, curious to witness the union of a billionaire heir and the doctor who had changed his life. At the front of the church, Jasper stood with the twins, both in miniature tuxedos, each clutching a tiny satin pillow. Their soft babbles filled the air and drew smiles from even the sternest of investors who had been invited. When the doors opened, Emily stepped forward. For a moment, the crowd disappeared. Sebastian's eyes locked on her and the world fell away. He had weathered boardroom battles, public scandal, and his father's ruthless interference, but nothing had shaken him the way her presence did now. She walked toward him with steady grace, every step proof that love had survived storms, fear, and betrayal. The ceremony unfolded with vows spoken not as tradition, but as promises carved from fire and trial. Emily's voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. I choose love over fear. I choose family over ambition. I choose you, Sebastian, every day. Sebastian answered with equal conviction, his gray eyes bright with emotion. I built empires for approval, but I will build a life for us. I promise to protect, to fight, and to cherish you and our sons, no matter what battles lie ahead. The applause that followed was warm, but it was not the loudest sound in the room. The loudest came from within Sebastian himself, the final break of chains he had carried since childhood. He kissed his bride and the crowd rose to their feet. Yet outside, in the shadow of the church walls, Theodore Cross stood with a manila envelope tucked under his arm. For months he had orchestrated photographs, fed whispers to the press, tried to break what his son had chosen. Now he held the last weapon, proof of his meddling. Jasper, sensing something, slipped out and confronted him. "You can't do it," Jasper said. "Not today." Theodore's jaw tightened, but something in his eyes shifted as he heard the sound of his grandsons giggling inside. He opened the envelope, then closed it again with shaking hands. "I thought destroying her would protect him," he admitted. "But she's the one who saved him." He dropped the envelope into Jasper's hands and turned away, disappearing down the street like a man finally defeated. Inside the reception, Emily cradled James while Sebastian held William. Music played softly, friends and family gathered, and for once the billionaire and the doctor were just two parents watching their sons clap sticky hands together in delight. As night fell, Sebastian led Emily onto the terrace overlooking the city. The skyline stretched before them, bright and endless. He slipped his arm around her waist and whispered, "This all began with one night I never planned. I thought it would change nothing. Instead, it gave me everything." Emily leaned against him, her veil stirring in the cool breeze. Sometimes, the best plans are the ones you never make. Below them, the city moved on with its noise and chaos. But high above, a family forged by accident and strengthened by choice stood together. Two tiny boys slept in the arms of friends inside. 2 rings gleamed beneath the starlight, and 2 hearts beat in perfect rhythm. The empire still waited. The battles of business would always return. But for Sebastian Cross and Emily Danoir, the story had already been rewritten. It was no longer about wealth or power. It was about love that had survived every test and twins who had turned one wild night into a forever they never expected.